Starting, we are recording, and you folks are already there. You folks are there. I see you streaming in the door, just as if we were here together. And so welcome, welcome. For all of you, I spend the first minute or two getting us settled in, as we would if we were in person as well. And we will, take a minute to explain to those people who have not been with us before how we work here. All right. Number one, what you should know is that I do the presentation first. And then once the presentation is done, I will come back and answer your questions that you will type in chat. Number two, I would love it if you would type in chat right now what you are enjoying in your glass at the moment. And I'll tell you what I'm enjoying in my glass at the moment. It's this hop water. It is non-alcoholic. It's called Hoppy. It's non-alcoholic. It's no calories. It's very refreshing. It tastes a little like hops. I have found it at occasionally at liquor stores, but also at Whole Foods. It's under the meat counter, and it is amazing. So that's what's in my glass. So somebody type in chat so that I know that it works. Somebody type in chat. What is in your glass? Seltzer, excellent. Rosé, excellent. As I often say, it doesn't matter what's in your glass. What matters is that we're here together, sitting down, taking a deep breath, right? Relaxing and enjoying plants. And that's what's important. So I'm so glad. And thank you all for chiming in. The other thing that I always love to know is this your first time in a happy hour or a seminar with me? And if so, put that in chat as well. Now, this is good sort of experience for those of you who have not been with me before. Well, good, Maggie, welcome. Because chat is where I answer the questions, all right? And so this is how we work. I'll do the presentation first, and then whatever your questions are, you type them in chat. I will take them from top to bottom after the presentation. And then if there isn't enough time to get to all of them, I promise you, I will record the chat session, and I will put the answers to your questions on the Country Garden blog on Monday. Okay? Promise. So whatever questions you have, whether it is about your houseplants or your hydrangeas, type them in chat, and we will be answering them at the end of the presentation. So welcome to everyone. Look where I am. I'm in the front section of Hyannis Country Garden. Yes, and it is just so beautiful. I mean, huge kudos to Christina and Danielle and all the other people who keep this section looking amazing, because it does look amazing, and it's filled with all of this color right now. And if you think that you are limited to mums for fall color, come on into the store, because what's going on there is incredible. All right, so let's now get to Houseplant Happy Hour. And I am going to, wait a minute, get to sharing my screen. Here we go. Got to find the right button. All right, and we are going to share our screen here, and we are going to play the slideshow. And the whole theme tonight is welcome home, because one of the things that we, are doing at Country Garden right now, of course, is making sure that the greenhouse is fully stocked, which it is. But at your house, you may be looking at the house plants that you put outside. You sent them to summer camp, and now it's time for them to come back in. And they are looking amazing, right? One of the great things about putting houseplants outdoors for the summer is that they grow and they look amazing when you bring them back inside. So this is the time that we were thinking about bringing them in. And whether they are outside on your front porch, like these were for me one year, these are, this is a euphorbia and an elephant foot and agave. Yeah, these were outside on my front porch. And then at this time, they had to come back in. I put a lot of house plants in under my grape arbor in the shade. And here are a number of them, and they're all around under the arbor. And now I'm starting to bring them back inside. Here's the thing. You want to bring those house plants back inside by the time that the nighttime temperatures start going to 50 regularly. So nighttime, 50. When you go to the long range forecast on your app or on the, your forecast website, you want to see that they're reliably going to 50. And that's your clue to bring these plants back inside. Now, this person actually looks like they sent their houseplants to summer camp, right? With a camper. Well, whether you sent your houseplants with a camper or not, it's time to bring them inside. This is my kitchen, and this is how it looked one year when those houseplants came back inside. And whether those plants are looking amazing and continue to look amazing, whether they get even better, like the clivia, sometimes flower in February, March, or whether they, like this begonia, they look amazing when you bring them in, and then they steadily look less and less amazing until when it's time to put it outside again, this is a begonia pretty pathetica. So that's all acceptable either way, but they need to come inside. Now you want to look them over before they come in. And for many people, they feel like, oh, I might bring bugs in the house. Frankly, insects are usually not the issue, all right? You want to be sure to look them over for slugs. You want to make sure that ants did not colonize in the pot, in the inside of the pot when they were outside. And you want to look them over for frogs as well. Now, how do you know if ants have colonized them inside the pot? You pick up the pot and you see if there's any action there going out of the hole of the pot of ants, number one. Number two, you can also pick them up and just bring them inside the door for a night and then see if there's any ant action. And if there is, you put it back outside and you treat it with diatomaceous earth. But ants are rare, but slugs and frogs, pretty common. And even, oh yes, mousy. My friend Roberta recently brought in a hanging basket that was so thick and wonderful and so protected that some mouse had decided to set up home in there. And fortunately, she discovered the mouse before her cats discovered the mouse, and she put the plant back outside to get rid of the mouse. But if your plant is big and thick, and this is not, by the way, a real mouse in a real plant, but if your plant is big and thick, pick it up and look inside. Make sure that Mousy has not decided that it's the perfect place for him to spend the winter. Now, here's what we're going to talk about tonight, okay? We're going to talk about the importance of finding the right light when you bring them back inside. We're going to talk about the ability to water well, which is huge. It's the main reason I think people lose houseplants is they're not watering correctly. We're going to talk a little bit about displaying them attractively, because this is the fun part of plants inside, is, decorating your house with them, staging them, making displays, shaking it up a little bit. So we're going to talk about that. And then we'll also talk about dealing with pests before we get to your questions. And by the way, for those of you who've just joined us, the questions will be typed in chat. So just know that you can type them in chat right away while you think of them, or you can do that when we come back after the presentation. Okay, so succulents and flowering plants usually want a lot of light, a southern exposure. And so those plants, particularly those that flower throughout the year, like this crown of thorns, you want a plant that's always in flower in your house, crown of thorns. Anthurium, you want a plant that's always in flower in your house, anthuriums, you got them, right? Those are plants that want a fair amount of light. If you bring your geraniums in from your window boxes, they want a fair amount of light. And if you're going to bring in any of the herbs that you have, like a rosemary in a pot, they want full sun, AKA southern exposure, preferably in windows that are not shaded by trees, so that you get that winter sun all through the winter time. Tropical plants, and this means most of your house plants, frankly, are fine with less light. This is a Monstera plant that was in my mother's apartment when she lived in assisted living, and it was a good 5 feet away from an eastern facing window. So, not that much light. And you can see how big and healthy and shiny it was. And in fact, by the time that, she left that apartment, this plant was, I don't know, 6, 8 feet tall. And people used to mistake her room for the complex's greenhouse because her plants were so lush in there. Most of the houseplants, I would say the majority of houseplants that we offer for sale at Hyannis Country Garden are plants that are tropical plants. And that's because tropical plants, number one, they are tough, okay? They have to survive in the tropics, you have to be insect and disease resistant. Number two, they are plants that survive in lower light, because under the canopy in rainforests, there is very little direct sun. And so these plants have to be very good at surviving with indirect light, and they are. And of course, there are all the ferns as well that are also good low light plants. Plants that do well in low light are fine in an eastern or western window. Some of them can even be fine in a northern window, as long as it's a big enough window and not filtered with trees. And the begonias that you may have outside, those are also low-level light plants inside. This is my immense begonia, which a friend gave me years ago, and it always goes in front of an eastern window when it comes in. Now, this is like the most important thing, is that you need to provide for watering these plants well, all right? And social media will lead you astray. It will lead in so many ways, right? So many ways. There's so much bad plant information on social media. Don't get me started. In any case, pictures on Pinterest and Instagram will lead you astray, because it makes you think that your living room can look like this, which is plants with either very, very tiny saucers, like this one at the bottom right, and this one on the right on the table, or plants like these two with no saucers at all. This is a lie, people. If you have plants with very tiny saucers or no saucers at all, they are going to be plants that are underwatered, guaranteed. And they are plants that are, they're just not going to do well. Because the formula for plant death is either to water too much, water too little, or, and this is where most people go wrong, they water in between. They give their plants a lick and a promise, as the old expression goes. And the lick and a promise means that you water your plants a little bit. Maybe you're afraid they're going to be overwatered, so you just water them a little bit, right? Or you give them a lick and a promise because there's no saucer underneath, and if you give it too much, it's going to flood your floor. And so you just give them a little bit. Let me show you why this is a mistake. Now, here is a dry pilea plant from our greenhouses at Country Garden, okay? And I went in the greenhouse one day and I found a plant that was dry, and I took it to take this picture. And here is how we know it's dry. First of all, it looks kind of dry. It's not dark in color, it's light in color. If you could feel this by putting your finger there, you would feel that it's dry. And that's what you should be doing with your plants at home. You should be sticking your finger into them to feel that it's dry. And the next way we know this is dry is that there is this gap. See that dark line right there? That's a gap between the soil root ball and the pot. And when plants are dry, they form this gap. So when you see that there's a space there, even if it's tiny, that means the plant is dry. The other way that I could tell this plant is dry if it was right in front of me is by lifting it up, because if I lifted it up, it would be lightweight and I would know that it was dry. Here is a dry Dieffenbachia, also called dumb cane. And again, see that gap here, right? That gap indicates that the root ball is really dry. See, this is light in color. That's dry potting mix. If you felt it, it would feel dry. If you picked the pot up, it would not be heavy. It would be lightweight. All of those things would tell you that this was dry. Now, here's the deal with a root ball, with a house plant, all right? And this is the dry Dieffenbachia that I pulled out. And you can see that the soil mix is all light in color, right? And look where all the roots are. The roots are down here, right? And these white roots, those are the newest roots. Those are the most vital and important roots, okay? So this is what it looks like when it's dry. I took these two pots, the dry pilea there on the right and the dry Dieffenbachia or dumb cane on the left, and I gave them just a little bit of water. I gave them the kind of watering that someone would give them if they were afraid of overwatering, or if they were thinking that they didn't want to water too much because, there wasn't a good saucer underneath and it would flood their table. And this is what happens. All right. This is the pilea. And this is when I gave it just enough water so a little bit came out the bottom. All right. So I might, seeing water come out the bottom, I might think that this plant had a good watering. But look at it, right? Look, this is the corner that got well saturated and a little bit here on the bottom. Only this dark area here is well saturated, all right? The rest of this root ball is still dry, and it is going to be dry. And this is a plant that is going to start to fail because half of its roots or more are drying up. You might have think you watered this because water came out the bottom hole. But remember that gap that I showed you? Oftentimes when we water plants, the water runs through that gap and out the bottom. You think that maybe the plant has had enough water, but most of the root ball is dry. Here is the Dieffenbachia, Again, see, this is very dark here. That's the area that got watered. But look it up here. This area is all still dry. This area has roots that are going to dry up and die, meaning the plant is not going to do well. The plant is going to start to fail because it was only given that lick and a promise that I don't want to overwater, that I don't want water to come out onto my floor type of watering. So here we have the dry root ball. Yeah, I'm repeating this because it's important. It's important. Dry root ball here, all light in color, right? Not enough water, some dark areas and some light areas. And this is what that same root ball looked like when I did indeed give it a really good deep soaking. It's fully saturated. It is all dark. Every single root in that pot has access to the water it needs. Success. That's what you're aiming for. Now, in order to get that, you have to have a saucer that is big enough to let overflow liquid out. All right. It's just really impossible not to water well unless you're willing, like in a greenhouse. If you have a greenhouse, like a Country Gardens greenhouse, we can let that water just flow out onto the ground. Doesn't matter. The floor is cement. In your home, you probably don't want to do that. So you need to have a big enough saucer so that it can collect a good amount of water. You could leave that dry house plant in that saucer with the water for a few hours, even up to most of the day, right? And then if the water is still there at the end of the day, you can take an old towel, an old bath towel, right? And soak up that water by putting the towel there in the saucer and get the rest of the water out. If you do that, if you get the rest of that water out at the end of the day, this plant will not be overwatered, all right? It will be well watered, it will be hydrated, it will be happy, but it won't be overwatered. So you need a large enough tray or saucer to catch all of the overflow. And if you have a pot like this that has its own built-in saucer, that saucer is not large enough for the job. It looks great. I give you that. It looks amazing. It is not big enough. You need a saucer like this clear one underneath that can really catch a good amount of overflow so that you can water that plant thoroughly. You can put plants like this with those tiny saucers that are attractive and not functional. You can put them on a bigger tray on your windowsill or wherever you have your table where you have your house plants. And there are any number of sizes and colors of these trays available. So you can make a nice display and still, when you water these plants really well, and they can overflow onto this tray, you can suck up the water, or you can leave the excess water on the tray to provide a little humidity. It's up to you. But in any case, that's going to allow you to thoroughly water your plants. And here's just some of the trays that we have at Country Garden. We've got white and gray and taupe and terracotta and white, and we've got round saucers that are clear. We've got round plastic saucers that are in a variety of colors to go with your pots. So pick the ones that you like the look of for your house, but make sure that you are watering well. Now, I want to just say a quick word about the overwater orchid. And that's because orchids these days, they are shipped in these plastic pots. And it's very easy to overwater these plants so that then their roots rot. And that's because they're in a plastic pot in sphagnum moss. And they do this not for the good of the orchid, but because of shipping. You know, these are shipped from places in Florida or Hawaii, And if they're in orchid bark, which the orchid would prefer to grow in, they don't ship well because the bark is going to be all over the place. So they do it this way. But you, if you love orchids, first of all, if you get a plant like this, as soon as it finishes flowering, pull it out of that plastic, take the sphagnum moss off, and repot it in a clay pot with real orchid bark in it. Like this, right? This is real orchid bark. And the plant is going to be much healthier. Now, I wouldn't put it back in the plastic. I'd put it right in the clay pot, all right? This is what it looks like when someone has been overwatering an orchid in that plastic pot in sphagnum moss. See all of these tan roots here and brown roots? Those are all rotted. This right here, the white one, that is a live root. This tan and white one, that is a live root. But look at this plant. The majority of the roots on this orchid are not in good shape. They are rotting and should be cut off, and this plant replanted in orchid bark. So if you love your orchids, just be aware of that. Also be aware that when it comes to any plant, the hole is for drainage. That's why it's called the drainage hole, right? And you don't want to cover it up because this is how plants grow. They put their roots down to the bottom of the pot. So no rocks, no shards, no petals, no bark, nothing should go in the bottom of your pot but potting soil. And if you know, all the plants that you get from a professional grower, those are all in pure potting soil. There isn't a rock or a shard in the bottom. There isn't a seashell or a paper towel over any of the drainage holes. So do not plug or cover up your drainage hole. Never do that, all right? Only soil in that pot and all the way to the bottom. The soil does not come out much. It truly doesn't. You don't have to cover up that hole with a piece of screen or, you know, any of those ridiculous things. No commercial grower does that. So follow the professional's lead. Now that we've gotten the basics of keeping a plant alive and healthy well, the right amount of light for them, the right window, and the right watering, now let's talk about having fun displaying them. And one thing to do when you bring your plants inside is look and see if you need any plants that have different color foliage. And I tell you, the breeders, the plant breeders now, they are all about developing plants, breeding plants, selecting plants with different color foliage. Lime green and purple will make your houseplant display come alive. This is at Hyannis Country Garden, okay? This is at the garden center. And I show it to show you the difference that it makes when you've got a plant with lime green foliage next to a plant with dark green, next to a plant with purple foliage. You know, that's what makes a whole house plant display come alive. And Mary, I don't answer raised hands. I can't do that while I'm speaking. Okay, so I cannot answer raised hands. If you have a question, type it in chat. And when I'm done with the presentation, I will come back to chat and I will answer all the questions. But it's too much multitasking to keep my train of thought and move the slides and give you the information you need and pay attention to raised hands. So type your questions in chat and we will get back to it. So, you know, think about arranging your plants indoors with plants with different sizes and textures of foliage next to each other, different colors of foliage next to each other. That's what makes a beautiful garden outside, and that's what makes a beautiful garden indoors as well. So arrange your plants accordingly. And you might want to raise some of them up, and there's so many ways to do that. This person used these, I think these are candlesticks, you know, for big candles, But pedestals, this person used pedestals to raise some of her plants up and get a nice display of her interior plants. You can use pieces of furniture like this old vintage stool. You can turn pots upside down and use those. So you can create, right, an arrangement where some plants are tall and some plants are shorter, just even using things that you already have on hand. And have fun arranging them. You can put them together with other objects. So here we've got the plants with different textures of foliage and different colors of foliage. We've got a couple of plants in bloom. We've got color echoing here. The purple gazing ball, the purple orchid, the purple African violets, the purple glass watering ball. And then we've got these funky faces that I just love so much. These pots can hold anything from pens on your desk to air plants, as they are here, to feathers. That's one thing that I use them for, is the feathers that I find outside. I stick in those kind of pots. Now let's talk about dealing with some problems, and then we'll come back and answer your questions in chat. This is, I think, the sort of the basic kit for bringing houseplants inside. You want spinosad, and you can either get, there's Monterey, this brand, National Guard, Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew. These two are both spinosad. Spinosad is a natural bacteria that kills larvae when they eat it, okay? It is an organic treatment, and it is very useful for fungus gnats, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I always have spinosad on my garden shed or garage shelf. We use it for preventing the cabbage moths larvae from eating my ornamental kales or my edible kales at this time of year. I am spraying with spinosad. In fact, that's on my list for the weekend if it's not raining all weekend. So that should be in your arsenal for houseplant pests. The next thing should be insecticidal soap. And insecticidal soap is different from dish soap. All right, most dish soaps are not soap, they're detergents. They have all kinds of other things in them that are not intended for plants, they're intended for dishes. And so you don't want to use them on your plants. But insecticidal soap, this is a product that is made for plants, and it is very useful for most insect situations. And you want some sticky traps, okay? They come in various sizes and shapes. They're basically yellow, bright yellow, and they are sticky. So this is what you want. You want spinosad and yellow sticky cards, and both of those are helpful for fungus gnats. Fungus gnats are those little black, what we often call them fruit flies, that fly around, and we try and snap them, and we can never get them, right? Now, know this, there are 3 of these pesky little things that fly around. One are the fungus gnats that are living and breeding in your potting mix, okay? The second are actual fruit flies that come in with fruit. And if you've got ripening tomatoes on your kitchen counter, or ripening bananas or other ripening fruit, that's when you get fruit flies. And the third of these little black guys are drain fleas, and they breed in your drains. And they are 3 different separate insects. So one thing is to determine, you know, which one you've got, all right? Because if you've got the fungus gnats in your houseplants, the spinosad is a key part of control. And here's a yellow sticky card. This one happens to be rectangular. I think the ones that we've got in the store right now are thinner. Doesn't matter what shape they are. And here's what I want you to know about the yellow sticky cards. They are really sticky. So don't put them where you're likely to brush against them with your clothing, or worse, your hair. because your hair or your clothing will get stuck on them in a major way. So when you put them near your plants, put them back a little so that when you water your plants, you are not going to get those caught on yourself. And this is what they look like when they are on the job, right? In this case, they have trapped fungus gnat adults and even a fly, and probably a couple of white flies as well. These are also good for kind of knowing whether you've got an insect issue or not. And as soon as you see fungus gnats on this sticky card, that's when you start to put spinosad, like Captain Jack's, in the watering can. Before watering your plants, you put some Captain Jack's or another brand of spinosad into that watering can, because then it goes onto the roots of your plant, onto the organic media in your pots, and that's where the larvae are eating. And so then when the larvae eat either the roots of your plants or the organic matter in the potting mix, they die. So that's the fungus gnat control. And just get in the habit, if you have fungus gnats, when you bring them in, of putting the Captain Jack's or whatever brand it is in the watering can when you water. Now, here's another tip about fungus gnats, and that is they are most happy when the plants are constantly wet. And so if you have fungus gnats, let your houseplants dry out a little bit. If they're, as long as they're not a plant that needs to be constantly moist, let it dry out a little in between watering, and you will have fewer fungus gnats because they love that wet soil. And you want to be on the lookout for the other common insects as well, because once it gets to this point, it is really hard to get rid of. These are mealybugs, and they and scale are the worst. They are hard to get rid of, particularly in plants like this, where they can breed down in the crevices here. Do examine your plants before you bring them in. If you see any signs of something like this, spray them really well every 3 or 4 days for a while before you bring them in the house. You want to treat as much of that plant as possible before it comes in. Aphids, a lot of times people kind of freak out about aphids, but I have to say they are the easiest of the pests to manage. Not only can you wash some of them right off or squish them with your fingers, but insecticidal soap does a really good job on aphids. Just remember, for all insects, one application of insecticidal soap or horticultural oil, if you're using oil, one application does not do the job. And that's because in addition to the adults that you see in this picture, you see adults here, and you see nymphs here, and you see probably little egg masses in here as well. So the eggs will be hatching out over the next few days, which means you need to spray every 3 or 4 days for a little while in order to get all of those aphids. Scale is another problem that is hard to get rid of. And again, start looking for this problem early. Look on the stems, look on the leaves, look under the leaves. When the scale is young, it is not big and fat and brown like you see in this picture. It is small little tan dots. And you can scrape them off with your fingernail while you talk on the phone. And after you do that, you can wipe the stem and the leaves with a moist cloth, or even better, a cloth soaked in insecticidal soap. And then after you're all done with that, you can spray them well with insecticidal soap. Okay, now before we get to our questions, you can type your questions in chat, and I will answer up until 6 o'clock when it's time for us all to go have dinner. But this, you can take a screenshot of this if you want with your phone, or know that this is being recorded, and it will be up on the Hyannis Country Garden website under recorded events in about a week. and it's also on Facebook Live. So anyway, this is my contact information at Country Garden. This is our phone number at Country Garden. So, keep in touch by all means, and let's stop the share and let's get back here into the beautiful front annual section, right? And because fall is amazing. All right, now I'm going to go to chat, open up chat. All right. And I'm going to get back to the beginning here. Would agave and night blooming cereus be considered a tropical plant? Agave is not a tropical plant. That's a desert plant, okay? So that's a plant that needs bright light. However, the night blooming cereus, that could be considered a tropical plant. These are plants that are epiphytes. They grow up in trees in places like the rainforest. And so these are plants that, because they grow in trees, they can make do with less light. And so you can have those in a not as bright a situation. Can Solana begonias be brought inside to overwinter? Yes, they can. In fact, most begonias can be brought inside to overwinter. Here's what you need to know about begonias inside for overwinter. And that is, you bring them in, they look amazing, right? They'll continue to bloom for a while. Put them in an eastern, western window. They'll even take a southern window if you've got it, all right? But they will drop leaves. Expect that. They will drop leaves so that by next spring in April and May, they look pretty pathetic. That's begonia pretty pathetica, right? However, doesn't matter if they look pathetic, because as soon as you put them outside, they go crazy again, all right? Know this, do not fertilize them in the wintertime. Any of your tropicals or tender annuals that you're bringing inside to overwinter, do not fertilize them in the wintertime. You could start to fertilize them in February or March, all right? When the days are getting longer, that's when you can start to fertilize. If you want to give any of your house plants that you are bringing inside, if you want to give them a boost when you bring them inside, instead of fertilizer, earthworm castings are amazing. And I will usually buy a bag of earthworm castings. We sell it from the coast of Maine at Country Garden. I will buy a bag of earthworm castings, and I will just put like a cup of earthworm castings on the top of most of my plants when they come inside. That helps the soil stay alive. It gives them some very minor nutrients, but nothing that's going to push growth at the time of year we want them to be taking a break. All right. Last year, I had fungus gnats after never having a problem in 40 years. When I bring my plants in, can I do anything to make sure I don't have that same problem this winter? Yes, you can water with spinosad before you bring them in. Will it absolutely guarantee that you won't have the problem? No. In the natural world, there are no guarantees, right? We just, we do the best we can, and we know that things happen and insects lurk and, all of that. But start right now watering with spinosad in the watering can, and then put those yellow sticky cards next to your plants as soon as you bring them in, and you should be able to control the problem. And that's what I do every year. People often ask me, do I spray my house plants before I bring them inside? No, I do not. I don't have time to do that. So I bring them all. Okay. And well, you have to do Captain Jack's more than twice, Peggy. You have to do Captain Jack's for a couple of months every time you water when it's in your house plants, because you have succeeding populations. So twice is not going to touch it. All right. So repeat it. And use the sticky cards for trapping the adults, because when you trap the adults, they can't come back and lay more eggs in the potting mix. And keep your plants a little dry in between waterings. Those three things, you will absolutely get on top of it. Okay, I have heard that you should water houseplants weekly during the winter. Is that true? Kind of depends on the houseplants that you have, and it depends on how warm your house is and whether they're in a sunny window or not a sunny window. So I would say that houseplants need to be watered when they're dry. I have mine not necessarily on a weekly schedule, but something close to it. All right. And so I water them really well with saucers underneath so they can get fully saturated. And usually they can wait for a good 7 days, 6, 7 days before I water them again, with the following exception. And that is that in the height of the winter, in January, when your heat is coming on, the furnace is running constantly, your plants are going to dry up faster than they do at this time of year when your heat is not on, or faster than even in December when it's not that cold outside. So I think we all need to use our eyes more. We need to use our brains more. And we need to use our fingers more to have, that tell us when to water. All right. So you'll take a little look at your house plants every 2 or 3 days. You don't have to do it every day. Every 2 or 3 days, go on a little tour of your plant. Clip off any of the dried leaves that have, dried up, or anything that doesn't look right, or a spent flower. Clip those off. Feel the soil. Look for that gap around the pot that tells you that it's dry. You can pick up the pot. If it's lightweight, that's dry. And then you water. Okay, how much Captain Jack's per gallon in quart? Read the label. I don't have that in my brain. I'm sorry. I don't have it in my brain, but it says it on the label. So follow the instructions. The label is the law when it comes to these things. Can I speak about overwintering mandevilla? I would be happy to. This is the thing about mandevilla. They are easy to overwinter, but the mandevilla that you overwinter may not come into flower until August of next year. And the reason is these plants are triggered into flowering by long days, right? I'm talking June 20th, long days. And in the grower where they grow these, they have lights on them. So they give them 14 hours of day so that then when they ship those plants to the garden center in May, they are in full glorious bloom. However, if you have them in sort of the average short day winter, even if it's in your sunniest window, they are not going to come into flower until you put them outside and they go through the long days of June and July, and then they will come into flower in August. I don't know about you, but I want my mandevilla in flower at the end of May when I put it outside. And after a couple of years of overwintering my mandevillas, I decided this is not worth it. I can buy a big, gorgeous, wonderful one in full flower in May. That is worth it to me. If you overwinter it, just know they'll go through a vining stage. Let it do that. They're prone to mealybugs. Watch for them. They're prone to whitefly too. Watch for that. Start fertilizing them in March. Clip them back. They will come into flower for you in August. All right. Can you also speak about overwintering an olive tree? Yes, I've done that for a while. I'm not going to do it this year, but you want to put an olive tree in a really sunny window. I'm talking a southern exposure. If you don't have that, put some artificial lights, some grow lights near that plant. The second thing you need to expect is it's going to shed some leaves. Just does that, all right? The third thing is don't keep it constantly wet. Water it thoroughly, as we talked about, right? Saturating the whole root ball, water it thoroughly when you water it, but don't keep it constantly wet. These are Mediterranean plants that like to go dry in between waterings, and be on the lookout for the common pests. Can you speak about overwintering keeping poinsettia? Absolutely. Poinsettia are actually fun to kind of keep. You can put them outside in the summer. They make a very nice green plant in the summertime. But at this time of year, if you want them to be colorful again for the holidays, you need to bring them in soon. And you need to start giving them 14 to 16 hours of darkness. They're sort of the opposite of the mandevilla vine. The mandevilla needs that 14 hours of daylight in order to bloom. The poinsettia, in order to color up, needs 14 hours of dark. Some people do that by putting it in a room where they never have the lights on in the night. But even that, you may need to put a box over it, starting it now at 4 o'clock in the evening, and then take the box off at 9 o'clock in the morning. So give them 14 to 16 hours of dark into, November. Now, you have to give them light during the day. So that means you have to take off that box or take it out of the closet or whatever you've decided to do to give it the dark period. You've got to put it in the sunny part window during the day and keep it well watered, etc. The other thing you can do with the poinsettia, frankly, is put it in a room, in a window where, like an eastern or western window, where the lights aren't on in the evening and there's no street light outside giving it light. And you just let it go into the darkest time from Mother Nature, right? It's not going to be in color for Christmas if you do that, but it will turn color in January. So in January, if you just let nature give it those clues, it will color up in January, which is how they do it in the alleys of San Diego and Mexico, where these plants grow wild. So that's the thing about poinsettias. Poinsettias that you keep from year to year are never big and lush and full like they are the ones that you buy in the garden center. They're leaner and meaner. They're still interesting. They're an interesting plant to keep over. And I would encourage anybody who likes plants to do it at least for a couple of years just to check it out, because the bracts are smaller and they're not as big because they're not pumped up with a million fertilizers and they're not grown in a greenhouse, but do it. It can be fun. What is the typical shelf life of items like Captain Jack's and other sprays? Well, Captain Jack's is a natural bacteria, and I would probably assume that if yours is more than 2 years old, you should get new. All right, especially if it's stored in a place that's really warm, either in the summer or the winter. If you've got it inside in the winter time where you've got central heating, or if you've got it in the garage in the summer where it's hot, I would assume that you should replace it after 2 years. They also, every product has a phone number that's on the back of it. You can call them up and see what they say. But anything that is bacterial based, like the fungicide Revitalize, like Captain Jack's, the spinosad, that you probably want to replace after 2 years. Insecticidal soap, as long as it hasn't dried up, that can be good for years and years. My fig tree grew very tall this summer with 30 baby figs still attached. Should I cut it back when I bring it inside? I have a high ceiling room with southern exposures, so that is not an issue. Well, you can cut it back a little bit, but the more you cut a fig tree back in the fall, the fewer figs that you will have the next year. So if you can let it grow taller, or if you can just cut a few of the taller stems back and then, leave the rest, you will have more figs moving from year to year. I have a brown turkey fig that it's in a pot that's 2 feet tall, and the fig itself is 7 feet tall. It takes a hand truck and a lot of swearing to get it into my garage for the winter. But the years that I have cut it back a lot, I have seen many fewer figs on it the following year. How do you recommend to be done for hydrangeas in the fall? Your blue hydrangeas, I'm assuming you're talking about your blue hydrangeas. Number one, do not trim them back. Do not neaten them up. Do not try and bring them back and make them shorter under a window. Do not touch them with the pruners, okay? If you want to cut off the brown flowers, by all means do that. But you basically leave them alone once the leaves fall off, and usually this is the end of October after a really hard freeze. Once the leaves fall off, you might want to clean the leaves out from under the plants. This helps control things like chili thrips and the leaf spot fungus that we had so much of this year because of the damp weather. Other than that, you leave them alone and you hope for a mild winter. No amount of wrapping a hydrangea really protects it when the temperatures go below 5 degrees. And that's the danger. When we go below 10, we're in hydrangea danger. And if we go below 0, we're in hydrangea hysteria time. And I often say for protection, prayer works as well as anything else. Oh, and by the way, if your hydrangeas are in a place where you haven't amended the soil much, it can be a gift to them to dump a bag of, compost or composted manure all around that plant. That's probably the best thing you can do for hydrangeas at this time of year. Let's see. New young fig tree. Any recommendations for bringing it in? You bring it in October into an unheated shed or unheated garage, not a shed. You need it in a place that's cool where it can be dormant, but it doesn't go below freezing. You can bring it into the house, but it's better in a cool place where it's dormant, less prone to insects, totally less prone to insects. And things like bay trees also much less prone to scale on a bay tree when it's in a cool garage, even if it's not much light, than if you bring it into a house. I know these are not houseplants, but can you overwinter hosta and heucheras that are in containers? Bring them into an unheated shed or garage. If the containers are clay, they're going to crack, so bring them into an unheated garage if that's the case. In terms of both of those are hardy in a zone 4, both heucheras and hostas are hardy in a zone 4, so they'll live in a big, if they're in a big container, they will live through the winter. If they're in a small container, root systems freeze in small containers. So I would probably, to be on the safe side, I'd drag them into the garage and stick them. They're going to be dormant. They don't need light. Check the water. Any plant that you've got in your garage, feel the soil maybe once a week. Water it if it's dry. They don't need water very often, but maybe once a month they might need a good soaking. Put those saucers under them so that you can water them. Let's see. Do succulents need different watering practice, or is drenching okay for them once in a while? Once in a while you can drench them, but don't let them sit in that water. Basically with succulents, you can go on an every 2-week watering with most succulents. So again, let them dry out before you water them well, and then wait until they're dry again. I use that same watering technique for my agaves and my cacti and my euphorbia succulents, all of the succulents. I do that same thing of drenching them well, letting them sit for a couple of hours in the saucer, then taking the excess water out of the saucer, and then you wait until they're dry again. I don't have enough southern exposure to hold all my houseplants. Can I keep hardy houseplants in a garage under grow lights if I water them? Not the tropicals. If your garage gets much below 50, the tropicals are not going to be happy, lights or not. You might have a basement that doesn't get below 50. You could put them in the basement with lights. Yes, the lights will keep your house plants happy. The lights need to be close to the plants, like no farther than 12 inches away. Get, grow lights, or are there any number of lights you can get for house plants these days? So get those. And but make sure that where they are, it's not going below 50 for tropical plants. And when do you fertilize hydrangeas in the fall? You don't fertilize them in the fall. I know that the fertilizer packages tell you to do that, but fertilize them in the spring. April is the perfect time to fertilize hydrangeas. I would use holly tone around your hydrangeas, or you could use flower tone, I suppose. And that's what I would do. And we got through all the questions, and it's time to have dinner. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me tonight. It's been great to be with you. Come and check out this beautiful, look at all these gorgeous plants that are, I took this picture this morning. This is how the garden center looks right now. Come and check it out. I hope I see you soon at Country Garden. Shoot me an email, calfinari at Hyannis Country Garden at countrygarden.com. It's time for dinner. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.